Hi everybody, welcome back. Today I wanted to just go over how to calculate inflation. So inflation is that measure, one of our big macroeconomic measures of the well-being of an economy. It shows us how prices change over time, and it's based on looking at the prices of a basket of goods that's representative of an individual consumer's monthly spending. And so I just wanted to take some time and talk about it because I think it's really useful for understanding how this works to look at a numeric example and really walk it through. And so in this case, we're going to be talking about an example using CPI data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we're going to do it the same way they do it, except much, much more simply. So what they do is they set a basket of goods and services that they think is representative of what an average consumer needs or consumes. They calculate the value of that basket, and then that basket forms the consumer price index. And the consumer price index is a measure of the changing value of the basket of that basket of goods. And so what we'll do is we'll fix our own miniature basket. We'll use some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just like the CPI comes from, and we'll calculate a couple of CPI values. And then when we have more than one, we can calculate the inflation change, the percent change in inflation, the inflation rate over time. And that will just tell us how the price level is changing. There's a couple of different ways we can do this. We'll do it pretty simply just to get the sense of it, and we'll talk about how we can make it more complicated. And the way I'm doing this is by pulling data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Beta Lab. And so I'm going to pull that up for you and show you how I got there on my webpage. So give me just one second. Okay, so we're going to start out by going to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS.gov webpage. And what I want to look for is they are going to give us all kinds of data. They are a great repository. They collect and disseminate tons of economic data, including unemployment rate, labor force participation rate, and the consumer price index, which you can see right down here is up 0.6% compared to the previous period. There's the unemployment rate, average hourly earnings, producer price index, and other cost indices there. But that's not what I want to use. I want to go to their Beta Lab and look at the data resources they have there. Because when we go over to their Beta Lab, what we can do is pull some actual price data. And so I'm going to go to their searchable databases, and I'm going to pull up price data on a couple of things. And I just want to get something that's kind of representative. I'm going to go to the data finder and try to get something that represents what the BLS uses in their basket. Because the reality is the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates prices for everything they think an average consumer will consume, from food in the house to food outside of the house at restaurants. Car insurance, gas expenditure, other transportation expenditure, housing costs, insurance costs, entertainment expenditure, streaming costs, cell phone services, anything that you might spend money on. They're going to think about whether or not that should be included in the basket. And so the basket is incredibly detailed and goes down to the point of looking at what the price change has been for cookies out of all baked goods, out of all food produced at the store. But what we're going to do is just look up a couple of basic things. So I wanted to look up housing, because I think that's important. And so I looked up what their prices were, and I've already pulled this data for us. I wanted to pull up housing, so I looked at housing size A for all consumers, and we could go in and look at what that meant. And then I wanted to pull up transportation, and I'm going to pull up whatever they have here. We're going to do their housing. All these are regions that I'm going to try and make it here. Oops, went too fast. I'm going to look at some more and pull up the one I think I wanted, which is transportation services, Class A for all. I'm going to look up some food prices, and the food prices get into a lot of detail. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I'm just going to look at all food. So we're just going to call this where'd it go? pull one of these measures, and you can see they break it down to different regions. We are going to try and look at non-durable, less food. Other food in the West. Let's pick that. And then we can also pick a measure for energy, because that's another element. And so I pick all of these different things, and you can pick whatever you want. I'm just going to go ahead and pick the first energy that pops up. There we go, for all urban consumers. And now that I've picked my different data sets, I'm going to pop it into this Bureau of Labor Statistics beta data viewer. And we can see the data over time here for these different variables. But what I want to do is I want to download the data as an Excel file. And I've actually already done that, so I'm not going to use this file. I'm going to go ahead and open the file that I created previously to prepare for this. And so let me pull it up. Here we go. So here we have the data that I pulled up. So we can see I have here energy price data, and this is energy for the US average for urban consumers, not seasonally adjusted, and it's organized by year and then by month, and then there's values, and these are in dollars. And then I have here the price of food. This is the US city average, not seasonally adjusted for urban consumers, and again, it's organized by year and then by month. And then over here I have housing, and there's not as many observations for this. They're only getting it quarterly. And this is housing in the West, sizes B and C. And so I've got, excuse me, for the first half of 2021 and the second half, and then the first half of 2022 and the second half, and then the first half of 2023. And then I have the same for looking at transportation costs, Class A, all urban consumers. And so what I'm going to do is I want to find something that's consistent across all of my categories. So they all have a first period of the year. And so I'm going to select that value, that first period of the year for transportation, that first period of the year for housing, that first period of the year in 2021 for food, and that first period of the year in 2021 for energy. And I'm going to go through and collect all of those and put them all together. So let's look at what that looks like. So here I have all of that price data for those 3 periods. So I've got one observation for each year for my 4 different categories. So I have housing in 2021, 2022, and 2023, transportation in 2021, 2022, and 2023, food and energy, all for 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then what I want to do is calculate the consumer price index. And what the consumer price index is just what that price of that basket of goods is. And there's 2 ways we could do that. We could do it weighted or unweighted. What does that even mean? So first we'll do it unweighted. And what we'll just do is add up all of these values to get a sum. So we'll get the price of the basket. We'll call it our total price, but that's our price of our basket. And we can put it down here. Okay. And so for the first one, we have 166.33, $214.09, $270.94, and $205.27, which all together added up gives us a total cost of the basket of $856.63. I always tell my students this, double check my math. Let me know in the comments if I got something wrong. Please feel free to update me because I don't want to be wrong on the internet forever. The next basket is going to be a little bit different prices. We can see the prices have gone up, but different prices went up by different amounts. Energy prices went up a lot, housing prices went up a little, transportation went up a lot. So to get the price of this next basket in 2022, consuming the same stuff, we just go through and add it up again. $177.9 or $177.90 $256.08, $289.72, and $260.65. Altogether added up is $984.35. $984.35. And then we do the same thing in 2023. And again, generally prices have gone up. Although if you look, transportation, after going up a lot in 2022, barely went up in 2023. Whereas we see food went up pretty dramatically and energy went up pretty dramatically. Housing went up more than it had in the previous period. So if you calculate the value of this basket, the cost of this basket of housing, transportation, food, and energy, we get a total cost of $1,050.78. And then we can go through and calculate the CPI for all of these. And the way we calculate the CPI is just by comparing the price of the basket now to the price of the basket in the base year. And that's the other important thing when we look at, I'll keep this for one more second, when we look at the CPI, what we want to do is we want to select a base year or a base period. And that's where the idea of the consumer price index being an index comes in. The base period is going to have a value of 100. That way we can measure the magnitude of change while taking the units out. So we can see anything above the base year is higher, anything below the base year is lower. And those incremental changes are showing us the percent change, which is more meaningful than knowing how many dollars prices increased. We want to know how the value of prices overall changed, because that's going to give us information about the purchasing power of money, of wages, and allow us to calculate real versus nominal variables. And so to get that index, to get that consumer price index, what we're going to have to do is, if we want the CPI in 2021, we want to find the value of the basket, or the cost of the basket actually, in that first period divided by the cost in that base year. And we usually pick the first year to be the base year, and that's what I'll do now, but you don't necessarily have to. If I'm looking at prices going back to the 1920s up to the 2020s, I might want to pick 1991 as my base year, just because it's a mid-ground, so I can sort of gauge it to a more recent level of prices. I keep messing up my text here. In current period. And then we want to divide it by the cost of the basket in the base year. And then we'll multiply it by 100 to get a full index value, a base of 100. So if we go back and we say, okay, given that information, I'm going to go ahead and erase my beautiful basket here now. I want to calculate inflation, and I want to know what is the CPI for 2021. So we're going to say, okay, first of all, we have to pick a base year. And we're going to say our base year is 2021. And then to find the CPI in 2021, we need to find the cost of the basket in the current period. The cost of the basket in 2021 is $856.63. $856.63, and then divide it by the cost of the basket in the base year. That's going to be the same for that first year, for that base year period. The cost of the current year and the cost of the base year are going to be the same. So they're both going to be $856.63. So when we multiply it by 100, we're going to get a CPI of 100. Because when you divide something by itself, it becomes 1. So far, so good? That's not the most exciting one, so let's make it more interesting. Let's calculate, I'm going to just kind of mix up my colors here to keep it popping for us, the CPI in 2022. So So now we want to compare, we're going to still have our base year be 2021. So I know my denominator, my lower value here is going to be 856.63. But I need the cost of the basket in the current year. For 2022, that's going to be this one, $984.35. So that's going to give me a different value, and that value is going to represent the percent change in prices based on the previous period. So now we want $984.35, and we're going to go ahead and calculate that in real time for you. So I've got 984.35 divided by 856.63 equals 1.14909. Multiply it by 100 and I get an index of 114 and I'm going to just go ahead and average to the last two decimals or round to a 9.1. So this index value tells me that prices have increased based on the previous period. The previous period was our baseline, and now prices have gone up, and they've gone up by 14.91%. So now let's calculate the next CPI. Now we want to get the CPI for 2023. And again, we're going to hold the base year constant. But we need the price of the basket in our current year, which is now going to be 2023. That's going to be that $1,050.78. So we plug in the cost of that basket. And 78 cents. And then we can do our calculation and say, okay, 1050.78 divided by 856.63 gives us 1.22664 times 100 is going to be a CPI of 122.66, rounding to the second decimal. Cool? So now we have CPIs for all these periods. All we need to do next is calculate the inflation rate. And remember, the inflation rate is just the change in the CPI over the previous period. So if I want to compare the inflation rate from 2021 to 2022, I say what was the CPI in 2022 minus the CPI in 2021 divided by the CPI in 2021 times 100. Or if I want to do it for 2023, I could say I want to know what the CPI is in 2023 divided by 2022 minus 2022. So the difference between calculating the CPI and calculating the inflation rate is that with the CPI, we hold that base year the same every time. But with the inflation rate, we're just looking at the change from the previous period. If I wanted to mix it up and I wanted to look at the CPI, the inflation change over the last decade, I might say, okay, what is the inflation rate from, say, 2013 to 2023? Then I would say, okay, what's the CPI in 2023 minus the CPI in 2013 divided by the CPI in 2013. So for the CPI, we're comparing our value now to a base period, but for inflation, we're comparing it to whatever the range we're looking at inflation over. So let's get rid of this and calculate that inflation rate real quick. And so what we're going to see is, if you want to see inflation, let's see, from 2021 to 2022, that's going to be taking this CPI and this CPI. So we're going to say 114.91 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100 to get it to a percentage, because what we'll get is we're going to get 14% or 14.91% inflation. If we want to calculate the inflation rate for 2022 to 2023, it's going to be really similar. We're going to use the CPI in 2023, 122.66 minus the previous period, 114.91, divided by 114.91 times 100. And I'll calculate this one for you right now together. So I've got 122.66 minus 114.91 gives us 775. I'm going to go ahead and divide that by 114.91, and I get 0.06744, which is going to be 6.74%. So I can see that the inflation rate increased, but at a smaller rate from 2022 to 2023 than it did compared to 2021 to 2023. Real quick, let me show you one more thing, because the question you want to ask now is, do these prices all have the same impact on my budget? Do I spend as much money on housing and transportation as I do on food and energy? And usually we don't, especially when we talk about the CPI containing so much data. We don't spend as much money on gas as we do on electricity. We don't spend as much money on education and entertainment as we do on food and housing. And so what we'll do then is weight these by the role we think they play in a person's budget. So that's one way you can do it, is doing a weighted average of the prices. The other thing you can do is you can multiply them rather than by a percentage, but by the sort of quantity you expect them to be purchased. So if I thought I'm going to, buy 12 units of housing, if this is a monthly measure, and 52 units of food if it's a weekly measure, then you can do that, and then you'll get a larger basket value because you're buying more stuff for the year. And so that's where you get a little bit of the details into how the price of the basket is calculated. But the overall way that you're going to calculate inflation with a consumer price index is you set your basket, find the prices, calculate the price of the basket, and then use the price of the baskets to calculate your CPI, and then use the CPIs to calculate your inflation rate. And that's how you do it. Let me know what questions you have, and I'll see you next time.